Hello and welcome to another episode of the Hey Joe Show. I am your host, Joe, joined tonight by the lovely and talented Miss Erin. Erin, how are you doing?
Hello. I am fantastic.
Very good. We want
Absolutely wonderful. You know why?
Why? Because
it is September, and you know what happens in September?
Yep, pumpkin spice lattes.
Well, yes, that happens too. But actually, okay, this is
that what you're
not
a
popular opinion. But while I do like pumpkin spice lattes, I am a chai tea latte kind of girl. That is autumn in a cup.
A chai tea latte. I tell you what I enjoy.
Not Tai Chi.
Not chai tea or stretching. I tell you what I love is that we have the opportunity to watch on Saturdays some college football. That's what I enjoy. I was just going
to say, I'm excited about the fall.
It's
going to be fall.
That's right. And even if the University of Tennessee is going to continue to struggle, we're still going to continue to support them here in this
That's what
country.
We do year after year after year.
That's right. So, all right. Well, we want to welcome you tonight to our show. And always, we want to give a shout out to the folks over at the lightnetwork.tv. I want to thank you for allowing us to be on that platform and encourage those of you who have not gone to their website yet to go on over there to check them out. You'll find a family of podcasts, of which the Hey Joe Show is just one of many.
Just one of many.
And
they're all great. Though.
That's right. They're all great. They're all wonderful. So also we want to invite you, if you haven't already done so, go to our Facebook site, Kyle Publications, like the page. That's how you'll follow us. That's how you'll know about the newest and latest information from Kyle Publications. And of course, as always, we encourage you to go to your favorite podcast download, whatever site that may be, if it's Apple Podcast or whatever it is, subscribe to the Hey Joe Show and give us a rating. We have actually had some people give us a rating, and it actually helps us.
Actually.
That's right. And it helps us actually move up in the rankings. So thank you for that. Now, tonight's show is in fitting with the new format for the season, and that is that we are making this about questions that teenagers have asked me over the years.
Yes.
And of course, it's
been a lot of years. I mean,
I tell you what, going back through some of this stuff, I was reminded it's been over 10 years since I would say, now I've been working with teenagers longer than 10 years. I've been working with teenagers
since you've been keeping your questions.
Yeah. But it is of interest.
Some are timeless questions.
To note the time. Yeah. Just the history. I mean, God has really blessed us to work with some amazing young people and their families, and to be able to ask them questions and to get to know what's going on in their minds has been a wonderful journey. And so what we want to encourage on the Hey Joe Show, especially those of you who are teens, those of you who have teenagers, we would like to encourage you to submit questions to us at Kyle Publications. You can obviously message us there on Facebook. You can send us a message, I think, on Instagram. And I know that, through email, obviously you can always email a question at joe@kylepublications.org. But reach out to us with your questions. If you want us to discuss something that's particular to you, maybe something you're going through, but you haven't really verbalized it yet, and you're curious what the Bible says, this may be a perfect format for that. And so we want to invite you to send your questions in for this year. Those of you who are teenagers, those of you who are in junior high, those of you who are in high school, and even early college. And so we would love to have your feedback in that. But tonight, our show is dealing with a question that has been submitted to me in the past, and it really is one of those timeless questions. There's no doubt about it. It is a timeless question. And so I'll just go ahead and read that. And of course,
I'm all ears.
Those of you who are listening and following along on Facebook Live, feel free to offer your comments, and Miss Erin will see about those coming on the air. So here it is. It says this: just curious to see what you think about this subject. Yes, I know cheering is a form of dancing, but do you think it's wrong to participate in or to participate in other things such as school dances and proms? I thought that was quite interesting because at the core of the question is, I guess it was stemming off of cheerleading and maybe some of the routines that happen in cheerleading. But then the question really was more broad than that as it pertained to the subject of dancing, school dances, proms, and so on and so forth. So here's the deal. We've never been a radio station. We've never been a show to veer away from the tough issues, right?
Right.
And so I already know this going in that some of you have, upon hearing about the subject, you're already saying, oh no, here they go, right? Don't do that because this isn't really what I think and it's not really what Erin thinks. The question is there any biblical precedent for this concept, right? And so here's what we know. Dancing, dancing was a part of the Bible as far as the different narratives found within the Bible, different individuals found within the Bible. Sometimes you would look at it and say, wow, that shouldn't have happened. At other times you look at it and say, well, wait just a second. That didn't seem to strike him dead or strike her dead, and it wasn't a bad thing. I think of I think of David upon returning home and his wife after bringing the Ark of the Covenant back, I believe is what it was. I'd have to double check that. Now I'm going off of memory. That's never a good thing. Maybe one of our listeners can help us.
With Joe.
But anyhow, he was coming home and he was dancing, and his wife, which his wife's name was
Michael.
Or
in Hebrew, I think it was more like
Michal. She was embarrassed for him. Mm-hmm. Daniel's dancing at that particular, or David's dancing at that particular time. And you know, we're not going to go into all the details of it, but the idea was this, that it was for a purpose. And that purpose was in praise of God. In the Old Testament, it wasn't a worship service. It was a rejoicing, concept. So we do know it was there. Now, it wasn't always there in a good thing. We know that individuals dance in the Bible in such a way that it caused lustful feelings because it was a lascivious dance. And individuals were granted many gifts in result of that, and therefore John the Baptist, for one, would lose his head over an occasion along those lines. And so dancing is in the text. We can't say that dancing's not in the text. The question, though, is asked specifically, I know cheering is a form of dancing, but do you think it's wrong to participate in? And then the second part is to participate in other things such as school dances and proms.
So it's not just broad in the second part, it's broad in the first part because there's so many layers to cheering. Like, what kind of cheering are you talking about? Are you talking about lower level, upper level, professional? Because there's a big difference in even the dress with the cheering.
Well, and that's the obvious to me is as you talk about cheerleading or any other aspect for that matter, the dress is a conversation that you can't overlook. I mean, you just can't. Okay. There was a story out not too long ago. I heard or I read, I cannot remember where, so therefore do not ask me to put this in the show notes. But it was about how parents were truly weirded out by the fact that a pervert would be at a high school football game taking pictures of their daughters who were cheerleaders in certain poses that revealed certain parts of their bodies. I don't know what all that would entail. I don't know if it entailed a cheerleader doing the splits or there was a whatever it is where they hold people up on their head and there's a kind of a tower idea and, the girl puts a leg over her head and therefore her dress comes and shows up and it shows the bloomers that are underneath. I don't know what the pictures were, but the article or the story was very interesting in that moms and dads had not thought much about what their kids were wearing until a pervert took pictures of them in those poses. And it just opened the eyes of their parents. And I thought, man, that's very interesting that if those pictures taken by that individual had not caused that response within those parents, would they have thought much about the dress as it pertained to the cheerleading? Now, we got to be careful just to lump cheerleading in here because there are some bodysuits and other ideas on Friday nights. I mean, let's face it, we're in football season. and some of those outfits that are worn in other aspects, even within the band, they're bodysuits basically.
Well, and to be fair too, there's also a lot of schools out there, specifically Christian schools, that are very careful about their outfits as well. Of course, this wasn't necessarily, like I said, about the outfits itself in the question, but just the first part. I just thought there were many layers to it. And really, when you get to a professional level, someone posted recently, I saw a picture of they met some cheerleaders from a professional team, and it was, wow. Yeah, they had more clothes not on than they
Yeah.
had on.
Well, and that, I think, and obviously this question, when it was asked, um, had a particular direction to it, but there's no doubt about it that the clothing must be an issue, right? And so I want to make it sure that any of the listeners to the Hey Joe Show, in dealing with this idea of cheering, is it wrong to participate, that the question is more broad and the answer is more broad than just the idea of the dancing. You really have to ask yourself, is that clothing modest in the eyes of God? Does it present my body in a pure manner before God, in the sense of the way that I show myself?
And then lump that together with, what are you doing with your body in that outfit?
Right. And I think that's the idea.
Right. More than just a blanket statement.
Right. And I've always wondered, why is it that the outfits go hand in hand with the participation in the activity? And of course, it is that way within sports as well. And I would need to be fair to say in other sports, because I don't want, somebody to write in and say, well, cheerleading is a sport, right? I got my own opinions on that one, but that's beside the point. But the idea is this.
Mr. Football player over there.
Well, the deal is this. Why is it that the outfits need to be a certain way? And the argument is this: because of the movements that must take place within that group, right? Now, we all know that cheerleaders have been around for a while, and they used to wear long skirts, and the outfits were not the issue. So the question is this: did the outfits change because the cheerleaders' performance changed, and therefore the question about the dancing and the body movements came into play? And I think the answer to that is yes. Nowadays, you have more tumbling. You've got, it appears you have more, what is it called, where they throw them up in the air? Aerobatics,
aerodynamics,
whatever,
I don't know.
where they throw them up
Sounds
into
good.
the air. And so from that standpoint, somebody who's on that other side may argue that's why the outfits changed. But the question is still, is it wrong to participate in it from a dancing standpoint? And I think the other side of this, or to participate in other things such as school dances and proms, that's the question that we need to deal with. And that may be the question that somebody who listened to this will be curious about. And I don't know. I think sometimes people have their minds made up and lines are drawn pretty tight as to what their conclusions are. And so, but here's the deal. It doesn't mean we don't need to address it. So what are some biblical principles? That's a question. What are some biblical principles that need to be considered when it comes to the idea of, is it right or is it wrong?
Joe and Erin are not the authority.
That's right. So let's discuss some biblical principles. What are some things that come to your mind when it comes to these discussions? And I'll start us off, and then maybe we can kind of, like a ping pong match, go back and forth.
Or I'll just sit here and listen to you. That sounds good.
Oh, all right. That makes for great radio. That's right. So the idea is this. I think purity has to come into play immediately. Purity has to come into play from a standpoint of myself, if I'm the one participating, but also from the standpoint of those who are around me. And is my behavior something that is facilitating purity, or is it making it more difficult to have purity? I think that question has to come into play, because we know that over and over again throughout the scriptures that purity was something that was elevated, that was talked about from the standpoint of how we are supposed to purify ourselves, that there's an encouragement of purity that comes into play with this from our standpoint onto other people. We don't want to in any way, shape, or form put that as a stumbling block, right? And so I think purity has to come into play with this when it comes to any of these questions regarding dress, body movements, participation, things along those lines. So what's one that comes to your mind?
Well, that goes hand in hand with what I was thinking is, lust is a big factor in the discussion. I mean, you want to eliminate all opportunities for lust on your part and other people's. Ultimately, you're not responsible for other people's thoughts and actions. However, you can help or
Well, and
derail that.
I will say this. No doubt they're responsible for their own behavior. Otherwise, I would stand and have to give an answer for when other people sin,
Right.
right? And the Bible
They're
doesn't
responsible for
teach
theirs,
that.
but you're
But
responsible for
yeah,
yours, and you don't want to have any part of that.
yeah, we've got to be real in this, and we've got to stop using this as a cop out. And I know many people will use this argument as a cop out. Therefore, I have no responsibility in the way that I present myself before other people, and
Right,
that
there's
is
gotta be that
not
balance.
true according to the scriptures. I have it up to about right here when I hear people say, "But I'm not responsible," and I'm like, what's interesting is that you dangle a piece of raw meat in front of a dog and say, "I'm not responsible for that dog eating that piece of meat." And the reality is this: you didn't make that dog eat that piece of meat, but you sure did everything you could to make sure that that piece of meat was available to the dog, and it was in front of the dog, and it played off of the dog's senses. And the idea is this: you may not stand in judgment for their decision and their behavior, but there is an element of you putting things in front of them, i.e., temptations, that it is real.
So really what this whole discussion boils down to is basically how we ought to walk in our everyday lives and whatever situation that we come up against. You have to think and think to yourself, and what I'm doing, is it honorable? Is it noble? Will something good come about it? What is my intent in this? Could I make myself stumble? Could I make someone else stumble? There's just a lot of thought process. Oh man, it takes a lot of thinking to live.
Well, yeah, and to be a Christian too, yeah. I thought that was interesting what you said, because when you start coming down to the idea of something being right or wrong, you get into a discussion of, is it right or wrong, and based upon what standard is it right or wrong?
Exactly.
And so then the question comes down to, is it wrong in and of itself, or is it wrong because of a consequence of that happening?
Right.
Something may not be wrong in and of itself, but it can be wrong because of a consequence that happens as a result of it.
Well, and you also have to think, okay, the question was remind me, is it just dancing in general or going to a dance, or was it kind of twofold, threefold?
It really is. Dealing with cheerleading as a form of dancing, do you think it's wrong to participate in? And is it wrong to participate in school dances and proms?
Okay, so it was school dances and proms. I mean, I think you really have to look at too, like, what is accomplished at a school dance? What is the point of a prom usually? What are people expecting to happen? What is the reputation of that? And it goes right back to what we were just talking about. You have to weigh against that based on what you know to be good and right and a smart decision.
Well, yeah, and you do, and you've got to consider it. I will say this.
Yeah.
No. And of course, and I don't know if I've said this, I actually went to my proms. That was something that I was allowed to do, and therefore I do come at it from maybe a perspective of sometimes learn from me, not follow me in some of these things, right?
It happens.
But the idea is this: I know for a fact.
I, on the other hand,
you didn't,
no,
right? And I know that, but I know this much. The idea of the prom itself versus the after prom is something that sometimes people, at least in my experience, they were not able to differentiate between. Now, here's the reality: the dresses at those events were always meant to be sexual in nature, I believe. Go ahead.
Okay, who couldn't differentiate it? You mean parents who thought it was okay to go because during was different than after? Or
no, I think even in the discussion today, there are many Christians who probably do not understand some of those differences. Now, I'm not giving a stamp of approval. Don't hear that. But what I am doing is saying this: that if we're going to speak on this subject, we do need to be aware of what we're speaking about, right? And so the experience that I had was, the very first part of that was, that's when everybody got dressed up and took pictures and everybody was announced. But it was the after prom. That's where the lascivious dancing, right? That would be, teenagers who are listening to this, that would be the Can I
Oh,
say?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe
That
you
would be
should have
the
maybe
grooving and the moving in ways that shouldn't
the
have happened. How
grooving
about
in the
that?
movie.
You
Oh,
like that?
okay.
Did I save that one?
You
Right.
saved that one. Woo, I
And
was getting
so
a little worried there for a second.
here's the deal on that though. But there's no doubt whether or not the dress at that prom was meant to be sexual. It was form fitting. There were individuals who accentuated certain parts of their bodies, and so from
Okay,
the
let's talk about the
idea,
guys too, though.
well, yeah, well, the guys. I mean, here's the deal: you're wearing a black suit. You're wearing a black suit. I don't know any guys who accentuated any parts of their bodies wearing a tuxedo.
Except maybe the way they were moving and grooving, as
Well,
you put
that would have been at that other part of it, right? So here's the deal: in the picture taking part, there was a lot of sitting down at a table, parents taking pictures, things on those lines. But I don't want to excuse it because the dress was still not what it should have been in the eyes of God. I firmly believe that, right? Now, can you can you dress up and go to a formal and it not be that way? Yeah. You guys went to what's called protocol last year. And if I'm not mistaken, that's where people dressed up,
By
right?
you guys, he means our teenage son, and then I went as, I guess you could say, a chaperone.
Yeah, but people dressed up and that was a fancy meal.
Yes, the whole point of it was completely different, though.
Correct.
It was teaching etiquette.
Right. Yeah. And that would be the idea. Maybe some congregations have a prom alternative. But in that prom alternative, it doesn't mean that people don't get dressed up to go eat dinner. I guess the point that I am trying to make is it is possible to get dressed up without dressing immodestly.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Now, I am not
Absolutely.
suggesting that that is what happens at a prom. Okay. But here's my deal. The idea of is it wrong to go? I'm just saying, let's talk about the bigger picture. Now, here it is, because we do need to come down to it. Dancing is a part of the prom. There's no doubt about that. That's what it is. It is a school dance, right? And Patrick was right. I saw his note come across there. Nobody goes to the prom just for the announcement or to get. I forget everything about it. That dancing was a part of it, right?
Hang on, I missed Patrick's
And
comment.
he
I'm
is absolutely
No one goes
correct.
for the pics and the court announcements. Ah, okay.
Because if they did, they would leave then, right?
Right.
If they did, they would leave then. That's not why they go, right? It's
Right.
almost like people look at it as a rite of passage.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
and-
Even parents look at it as a rite of passage for their kid.
And almost if you don't go, you're missing out on that rite of passage. So everything that I've said, please understand, we're just talking about it in broad sense. Now let's get down to narrowing it down, right? And narrowing it down, first of all, is this: the world never sets my standard for rite of passage.
Absolutely.
Period. Now, there are cultures that have rite of passages.
Mhm.
I've seen some documentaries of cultures when a boy gets to a certain age, he is sent out of the village and he has to go out and live on his own. Therefore, he has to kill and eat and survive on his own. And then after a certain period of time, he's allowed to come back. And that has been his rite of passage, I guess. In the Jewish community, some would argue that a bar mitzvah is a rite of passage or a transition from adolescence into adulthood, right? In our American culture, even if the culture says it is a rite of passage, I am going to allow the word of God to dictate whether or not that is accurate or not. And I do not see within the pages of the word of God that a rite of passage is going to a prom.
Well, no.
So I just want
From
to say
that
that
perspective,
right off the bat,
absolutely not.
right? So America has an idea, but the question is God's idea, is America's idea in line with God's? That's a question. And in this line, God never says, hey, that's a rite of passage, right? So here's the deal. No doubt about it, the dress would be inappropriate. The question that it comes down to, though, I want to get to is this: the
Overall,
dancing.
majority.
The overall,
Majority. Not everybody, but majority.
overall, right? I want to be fair in this. We need to be real, but we need to be fair,
Right.
and I think you can be both.
Right. So
But the
majority,
idea
not
is
all.
this: what about the dances? The dancing in and of itself. So let's deal with that for a little bit because we have about 5 minutes left. Let's deal with the dancing in and of itself.
Okay, you go.
And I would throw this out there. The question is this: is all dancing wrong? We have to start there. Okay? Is all dancing wrong? Because if all dancing is wrong, and I mean wrong in the eyes of God, then therefore it doesn't matter when or where that dancing takes place. So dancing in and of itself, if the team scores, my favorite team scores a touchdown or a goal in hockey, and I stand up and I cheer and I start dancing in my living room because of a score, right?
Oh, just
Now, here's the
imagine that
deal.
one now.
Here's the deal. If all dancing is inherently wrong, then that dancing is wrong. Otherwise, now we're starting to differentiate between kinds of dances to determine if it's right or wrong, and therefore make decisions of why is it right or wrong, right?
Right. Oh, so you mean like clogging? Oh, that's
Well,
terribly,
that would be a question.
terribly.
Tap dance, clogging. Patrick wrote between a husband and a wife. If all dancing is wrong, therefore between a husband and a wife, it would be wrong too. Because the question is this: if it is inherently wrong, and of course, Patrick, I agree with you. It's not wrong between that husband and wife within a certain setting. I would agree with that. Because then there's the other aspect of the dancing. Then is what makes some dancing wrong, and it would have to be the setting, the influence, the persuasion, and the temptation. I mean, those are just things that come to my mind. And in that, I mean, this is it an environment that facilitates purity in the minds of the people who are there? If that environment does not facilitate the purity, then I would draw into question the activity within that environment.
Right.
Okay, that's number one. Go ahead.
Well, someone had mentioned 1 John, where am I at here? 2:15 through 17, which says, "Do not love the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life is not from the Father, but is from the world. And the world is passing away along with its desires. But whoever does the will of God abides forever." Which kind of wraps up what we've been talking about up to this point.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. The idea is this: that there is something that is of the world, and there's something that is of God, and you cannot partially love God while holding on to the love of the world, because that's opposite. I mean, they are opposed to one another, right? And so the question is then, what makes the dancing wrong? And obviously, here it is. The obvious answer is, does my dancing cause someone else to lust? Right? That's in the passage that was read there from 1 John.
Right.
Are you responsible for their lusting? They're responsible for their decisions and for their own sin. The Bible clearly teaches that. But am I ever responsible for my part in someone else's sin? And the Bible also teaches that.
Right.
And so I've got to be cautious of that. So it's not just about, well, they're responsible for them, and who cares if they look at me while I'm shaking my hips in a certain way that might cause an individual to look at me and lust after me. Well, no, that's not all on them. That's on you too, because of what you did. And so the lust factor, as was brought out, the idea of the location and the atmosphere that takes place within is also a factor. But I would say this as well: the dancing, it's not just what you see. Dances, proms, school dances are also, if I can use the concept, they are hands-on. Okay, I don't know how else to say that. I once had a young man tell me that when he slow dances with his girlfriend and he puts his arms around her waist or on her hips, and he would feel that person moving, or maybe her dress would be low cut in the back and feel her back, that didn't do anything to stimulate him in any way. And I just thought to myself, boy, that is somebody who is just simply trying to justify wanting that behavior to occur, because God
he's not a normal male teenager.
No, he's not a normal male teenager, because God intended those things to cause a response. God knows what he created, and for us to deny what is disingenuous. And so the reality is this: do I want some guy putting his hands on my daughter? Do I want my boys putting their hands on a young lady that is not their wife in that manner while she sways her hips and the music is low and the lights are low and the people are dressed up in such a way as to attract, and they're wearing all that perfume and stuff along. I mean, I'll just be real with you. All of that is to solicit an attraction, right? All of that is to solicit an attraction. And so the dancing, my conclusion is this, because believe it or not, we already are needing to come to a conclusion. So if those who are in the live audience, if you have a question or feedback, this would be the time for you to type it out, because we're about to get on and give a rundown of the feedback of those who are listening and those who would like to participate. But here's my general consensus on this.
Okay. Tell us.
The idea
tell
is
us the
this:
wise one. No.
all dancing in and of itself is not inherently wrong. It is the type of dancing. It is the atmosphere of the dancing. It is the movements of the dancing,
which sometimes can be coupled with the dress of what you're wearing.
The dancing,
yes.
right? And I would lump cheerleading in that. I just would. I'm sorry. I don't. I say I'm sorry from the standpoint. I don't apologize for that, because those same principles could apply to cheerleading as well, right? So this question, just curious to see what you think about this subject. Yes, I know cheering is a form of dancing, but do you think it's wrong to participate in or to participate in other things such as school dances or proms? Here's my conclusion on that. I think that there is enough surrounding those entities that it would be wrong for a Christian teen to participate in such. And you look at that and you say, well, how do you come to that conclusion? I come to that conclusion based upon the other things that I mentioned. The atmosphere. Does the atmosphere facilitate purity? Does the dress, is it meant to facilitate attraction sexually, or is it meant to also facilitate purity? Do the movements within that dance and the atmosphere facilitate inappropriate thoughts, or does it facilitate pure thoughts? And so based upon those things, I would say it is not appropriate for a Christian to participate in the school dances or even in the proms. I think that there's a time and a place for prom alternatives, and more congregations need to explore that. And if congregations don't explore that, then I think parents need to explore that on their own. There are other ways to celebrate cornerstones in life than to put yourself in situations.
Milestones, you mean?
Yes, milestones that facilitate impurity. So
you don't even realize what you just did.
I have no idea what I just said.
It's all right.
Anyhow,
it's all good.
Why don't you do this? Why don't you tell us what's going on Facebook? Because I see it lighting up over here on my screen, but not. I can't talk and read it at the same time. So Erin, take it away.
Oh, Jerry Elder, your comment is only partially coming. Okay. So we have people that agree with Joe.
Of course.
And our good friend Billy Palmer said, I just don't want to see Joe dance in his pleated slacks.
Hey, I don't want you to either, because I don't want any appropriate thoughts to come to your mind.
Okay, and then I'm trying to read Jerry's comment. It says, I think we must also be concerned about the sin of influence, my actions, and how they influence others. And that's all I can
Jerry, you're right in that. And you know, and that's a part of this. Go ahead. Is there more?
Yes, I got it. My actions and how they influence others, if they lead one away from the Lord, endanger not only me, but others. Beware is being aware.
Absolutely. And I would say this, that gets down to where that individual who does fall into the temptation of lust and inappropriate and impure thoughts, they will have to stand accountable for that. But we have to stand accountable for what you just said, and that is the influence that we can have for a positive or a negative. And we've got to clear that and understand that. And it's not always, I'll go this far. I mean, y'all know who I am, right? You know who I am. But what if I went into a strip club and I said, no, I'm only going here just to be a good influence on people? Well, the reality is this. You would say, Joe, what are you doing in a strip club? Right?
And for those that just tune in, they're like, what?
Yeah, what is Joe doing? But the idea is this. There's also the appearance of evil that comes into that. There is the influence that can be had on me. And then there's also, by my behavior, I can have negative influence on other people.
Well, and there's other ways to have good influence on people in other places.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. So what else do you have on the Facebook?
Well, either everyone...
On the Book of Faces.
Oh, man. Either everyone is slowed down or... I'm not getting them again. I think a lot of it comes down to wisdom.
Explain, please.
You want me to explain?
I know.
Oh no. I think a lot of it is this is wise for me. Like kind of you said kind of like, and Jerry was talking about the influence thing. I mean, at the end of the day, can I say that someone is terribly horrible and it's going to be the most worst thing ever that they attended? I mean, you already told the world earlier that you were allowed to go to yours.
Yeah.
However, is it
You may put up a front? I'll put up a front.
No. However, is it the wisest thing? Like you said, the influence, the what goes on. Is this going to be?
I love the comment, Patrick. Thank you.
Let's see. Talk to those who
He
are
said,
in.
Talk to those who when they leave the club.
Yeah.
Anyhow, go ahead. I'm sorry.
It goes back to question of wisdom. I think I think that encompasses everything that we talked about tonight. You know, what is my influence going to be like? What's going to take place in this? Everything that we talked about could be wrapped up in, is this a wise decision for me to make?
Very good. Greg chimed in and said, when the cheer outfits that were modest, the cheers and dances were not. I'm
really
not
think
necessarily sure I'm following that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Even at that time that the cheers were not
that was an old
appropriate.
comment. I think that went back to other things. But anyway, I think it goes back to. I mean, it ultimately goes back to the home, though. I mean, the parents make the decision. A child is still in a parent's home and underage, and they're going to make the decision. I mean, they're going to make the final call if their child can do it or not.
They will, but you know, the idea behind this is not for us to dictate to everybody else, but it's the idea of let's discuss this that teenagers are concerned about and questioning. And this is one of those timeless
that's the
questions.
Reminder.
Right?
I mean, we're kind of going on here is that these are, for those that are just tuning in, this was a question that was submitted by a teen themselves. Yeah. And so this isn't just something that we're just, let's talk about this. What do we think about it? This is something that teens want to know.
Yeah, teenagers want to know what the truth is on this. And so this isn't something that Joe and Erin just thought, man, let's get on a soapbox. No, this whole season is about questions that teenagers have submitted or will submit.
Right.
That we want to deal with. And so I didn't come up with that question. That's the beauty of the format this season. So
but I think we pretty much wrapped ourselves up about 3 times now. So maybe we should just.
We did. And we can't even chase this. Greg, I would love to chase this one, but we can't. Greg posted, the problem is when congregational members and elders say prom or dances are okay. We just.
There's no time for that. That's another episode in of itself.
We just know. Yeah, that's a whole nother episode, man, that we just don't have time to flush out. But that's when I say parents.
And that's another interesting thing. Someone said, I know why I danced when I was not living for my Lord. And that's a whole nother,
right.
That's a whole nother direction too, of those who are not concerned with living a life that's in accordance with this word, how they might look at it versus someone.
Yep. And just so you know, the line of questioning and the discussion that came after that went into a lot of what we talked about.
Yes.
The idea.
So you'll have to go back and watch.
Of the lust. Well, I'm talking about other teenagers. As other teenagers would chime in and help us with these questions.
Oh, back then.
That the lust also got brought up, right, as a major stumbling block when it came to this issue. Purity got brought up. And of course, there were always individuals that wanted to argue. And that's okay. It doesn't mean that I have to listen to it. So there you go.
All right. We're at 37 minutes. We are 7 minutes over.
So that's all we got for the tonight's show. Again, we want to thank you for tuning in. Those of you who tuned in live, I really am liking the direction of this year, and I think it's going to be helpful. So if you like tonight's show, share this video to your page. Invite teenagers, especially teenagers, to start listening in to this season of the Hey Joe Show. And we're going to do our best to reach them on multiple formats, because this season really is about the questions they have.
Right.
And that we want to get into. And maybe there'll be some really tough ones that Erin and I will be really challenged with that maybe we haven't thought about. So we welcome your comments. We welcome your feedback. Even though the show ends, the thread still goes at Kyle Publications on Facebook. We would love to answer, love to discuss. And if we need to do it so in a private manner, we can. But we'd love to discuss that. So thank you for tuning in tonight. I want to invite you to go over to thelightnetwork.tv. Check out the format, the family of podcasts over there. Like our page on Facebook. Visit us at kylepublications.org. And by all means, please subscribe to this podcast and us and give us a review. Erin, do you have anything else?
Only if it's good.
Yeah, don't review us if it's bad. We're not interested in bad reviews. Anything else you got, Erin?
I've got nada.
All right, we're out.
Please hang up and try again.